Now, ladies and gentlemen, this officially brings us to the beginning of our debate, where we move into the first round of questions. To reiterate the rules and the guidelines for you, our esteemed candidates, you each have 4 minutes to answer the questions that will be posed, and you will each answer the absolute same question. Your Excellencies, with respect and humility, if you surpass the 4-minute mark, myself or my colleague will have to interrupt your response. And this eventually brings us to this moment, ladies and gentlemen, where my colleague and I will open the envelope for the first round of questions.
Thank you, Anita. Merci
thank you very much, Anita, and thank you very much to our candidates who have just introduced themselves to yourselves, members of this public. As my sister has just reminded us, we are going to open, ladies and gentlemen, the first round of questions. We are going to remind all of us that the questions were drafted in English and in French. They were drafted by an independent panel. The envelopes were handed over to us a few minutes ago by Her Excellency Madam Konjit Sine Georges. And immediately with Anita, we're going to select an envelope. Anita, you're going to ask the first question.
Esteemed candidates, your question in English, and after that my colleague here, Fatima, will translate in French. Translating Africa's natural wealth into continental prosperity. Africa has everything it needs to feed her people, educate her children, and take care of her health. Yet, the reality defies this. How will you turn the continent's resource wealth into tangible benefits, reducing debt, ensuring sustainable financing for the African Union, and enabling Africa to control its destiny economically? Also, how will you ensure that the African Continental Free Trade Area achieves its goals?
Excellences, Messieurs les candidats, la question en langue française. L'Afrique a tout ce dont elle a besoin pour nourrir sa population, éduquer ses enfants et prendre soin de leur santé. Mais la réalité défie cela. Comment allez-vous transformer la richesse en ressources du continent en avantages tangibles, réduire la dette, assurer un financement durable pour l'Union africaine et permettre à l'Afrique de contrôler son destin économique? En outre, comment allez-vous garantir que la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine atteigne ses objectifs? Et on commence avec le premier candidat de Madagascar. Excellence, vous avez 4 minutes pour y répondre.
This question talks about the hopes. Then the first hope is that is contained in Agenda 2063. And we are going to just try and respond to this question. Perhaps not answer it completely, because you can't answer it in just 4 minutes. You can't show academically what it is that we can do in order to respond to this aspiration. So aspiration 1 of Agenda 2063 is as follows: a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Your question is huge. How can a chairperson of the African Union Commission with a very clear terms of responsibility, about 26 of those, and first of all, he or she has demonstrated leadership characteristics, has to have administrative capacity, has to know protocol, has to be diplomatic. How can such a chairperson respond to such a huge question? I am an economist. I am a finance person by training. I do have some ideas to share. First of all, I can emphasize the importance of continuing to develop the economy at the continental level. You did mention our joint initiative about developing trade through, in theory, the liberalization of trade, liberalization of the circulation of persons throughout our continent. In theory, I say, trade can effectively become a source of economic dynamism. I think, I understand that we're at about 12.6% of commercial trade between African countries. This is very low. For a continent such as Europe, a continent such as America, they go up to more than 50%. So what we need to do is to continue to continue with the efforts that we're doing. There's already a secretariat at the ICFTA. A secretariat, the ICFTA is just a geographical zone. It is the geographical zone. We haven't yet attained this free circulation of trade. But if we manage to ensure that a free trade can happen and can happen very quickly, it is very possible that we shall triple our performance in economic development. I am a farmer. I have a fish and chickens, and at a very small scale, and I support young farmers. And it's very difficult to pretend that one can have a good quality and one can sell the products to the neighbors. People are not able to really exhaust what is available in the market. But free trade is that. It is to learn how to master virtues, capitalism. Where do you find money, and what am I going to do to find the money? I think we need to start modestly. We need to start at the level of the local development, so that slowly by slowly, with support from the government and of course the support of the African Union, we shall then at the end ensure that all of the citizens, young, medium-aged, and especially women, can have the opportunity of participating in this large continental market. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Now I hand over the floor to you, Excellency Raila Odinga, first for your answer. 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Africa is, of course, the least developed continent by comparison. Look at economic statistics. But this is because there are historical reasons why Africa is where it is today. And we will say that Africa does not need to remain here. We need to develop Africa. There are several factors which work against Africa. For example, the international financial infrastructure has worked very much against Africa, because African countries have been made to borrow money at a very high rate of interest compared to other countries of the same status as the African countries. So we need to address the issue of rearranging the international financial infrastructure. That is, I think, one of the major starting points. Now, Africa is the richest continent on the planet Earth in terms of raw materials. But it's a paradox that Africa also is the poorest in terms of living conditions. We say that we need not remain for perpetually the source of raw materials for industrial west or east. That we need to do value addition to raw materials which are coming out of Africa before we export them. Then we've also said that Africa needs to trade more with itself. There's big potential. Like the African Development Bank today says that 7 out of the 20 fastest growing economies in this year are going to be African countries. They're much higher than Europe. We're only competing with Asia. So it is important that Africa enhances the trade with itself. The inter-African trade today stands at just mere 15%. Now we have the African Free Trade Area organization that was launched now 3 years ago, but not much has been achieved. Some of the reasons are issues that are actually solvable. The non-tariff barriers to trade that have been imposed by respective African countries. things like standards, which are different from one country to the other country, making it difficult for goods to move freely across the borders. Then modalities of payment. And then it's the other issue of infrastructure. I worked for 5 years as the African Union High Representative on Infrastructure Development. And here is another problem, because goods cannot move freely because of lack of adequate infrastructure within the continent. Kenya exported tea to Ghana, and it took 3 months of tea to travel from Kenya to Ghana. We have major infrastructure projects, the high-speed continental railway, the inter-African highways, Cape to Cairo, Tunis to Cape, Dakar to Djibouti, Dakar, Lagos, Mombasa, and so on and so forth. All these need to be developed. Energy is another factor. Energy is too expensive, but we can reduce the cost of energy and go green in the continent.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from Kenya, et à présent, mesdames et messieurs.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the response from His Excellency, the candidate from Djibouti. When you talk about the riches of Africa, we often think about natural resources, and the riches of Africa begins with its people. We have 1.4 billion inhabitants on the continent, and more than 60% of this population is young between 0 and 25 years. The first wealth of this continent is in its people. We must have the capacity to think about how we can ensure that these people, this population, can benefit not only from the existing wealth, but also add value to that wealth. How can we go about that? Through universal education, quality education in our countries. We should have the capacity of offering our citizens free education from the primary to the university levels, and ensure that this education is spread in all of the regions of our continent and of our country. We must remove the obstacles to education. The feminine population represents 50.2%. There are still cultural obstacles. There are obstacles to the education of girls. We must concentrate on valorizing our human resources. And then we have fertile land. What are we doing with this fertile land? We are still in many countries using very archaic agriculture. It is time to begin to develop an agriculture that I would call modern. It does exist in many countries. Look, for example, at a country such as Rwanda. Tea and coffee are actually, there's value added locally. Countries such as Ghana, countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, cocoa is transformed locally. Now, these raw products that we sell without adding value, we must be able to add value locally so that we can increase the wealth and also create employment. The transformation of agricultural products is a priority. So today, agriculture in many countries uses biotechnology. It uses the drip system. It uses seeds that are modified, that are quality seeds. Ethiopia uses quality seeds in order to be able to produce maize. Today, Ethiopia produces maize and wheat because of these seeds that are quality seeds. It is important to think about transforming agricultural product in place that will ensure that the people can get out of food insecurity, ensure that there is a specialized agriculture. There has to be areas of specialized agriculture, and that, I would say, is one of the steps that will lead to ensuring that this wealth can be at the benefit of the population. And then we come to natural resources. I acknowledge the work by President Museveni. He has said that he will not not export petrol or gas as long as there will not be a refinery in Uganda. These are the examples from African leaders who take the destiny of their people in hand so that they can actually have value added locally. Now, trade, everybody knows that it is through trade that development happens. Look at China. China and all over the Chinese economy really target production and exportation. When you add value to our products, we can become exporters. Let me talk about tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. That is not the problem. I think that the situation must be to, first of all, protect our wealth by transforming them locally. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, محمودعلييوسف.
Of round one, where I'm happy to announce we have a 5-minute break, and after this break we come to round two. You have been tuned in to us here from the African Union headquarters here in Addis Ababa, and we are bringing to you Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate 2024 with our three esteemed candidates vying for the position of chairperson of the African Union.
Merci infiniment, chers candidats, d'avoir répondu à la première question du premier round. Mesdames et messieurs, il reste encore 3 rounds auxquels vont participer les candidats et on va marquer tout de suite une courte pause de 5 minutes. On revient juste après. Merci beaucoup de nous prêter attention.
The right to proper health care, good food and nutrition. African countries, in the implementation of their national priorities under Agenda 2063, have made commitments to eradicate poverty in our generation, build inclusive and sustainable economies with shared prosperity for all, through social and economic transformation by focusing on the following areas. Sustainable and inclusive economic growth that reduces poverty and leads to increased income levels. Equality and decent jobs. Value addition in agricultural products and growth of agro-business and industries. Human capital development. Skills revolution in science, technology and innovation. Gender development, youth empowerment and employment generation for youth and women. Social security and protection for all people and infrastructural development. Good governance supported by capable institutions. Manufacturing-based industrialization. Promotion of culture, arts and sports. Peace and security. Let us unite to build the Africa we want.
We're at the heart of Addis Ababa, a city of transformation and beauty. This week, the city will host a pivotal event that could shape the future of the continent. Come with me as we explore what's about to unfold. Here at the African Union headquarters, candidates are in the running for the prestigious role of chairperson of the African Union Commission. Let me introduce them to you. The first candidate, His Excellency محمودعلييوسف, Djibouti. The second candidate, His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, Kenya. The third candidate, His Excellency Richard Randriamandrato, Madagascar. And now, let's take a deeper look into their profiles. at the African Union headquarters, candidates will debate their vision for the future of Africa. Watch the AU Commission Chairperson debates live on EBC exclusively on December 13.
Rights is implemented are the judicial, human rights and legal organs of the African Union, namely the African Union Commission on International Law, the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the African Court on Human and People's Rights, the African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption, and principally the African Commission on Human and People's Rights.
Bienvenue encore une fois parmi nous de la Commission de l'Union africaine à Addis Abeba. On est heureuse de vous accompagner ce soir pour la modération de ce débat. Je rappelle pour ceux qui viennent de se joindre à nous qu'on a pu suivre il y a quelques instants un premier round durant lequel les candidats ont répondu à la première question avec bien sûr Excellence Monsieur محمودعلييوسف, ministre des Affaires étrangères du Djibouti, Excellence Monsieur Raila Amolo Odinga, ancien Premier ministre du Kenya, enfin Excellence Monsieur Richard Randriamandrato, ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de Madagascar, et on revient tout de suite pour le deuxième round, Anita.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Anita.
About to start the round 2 of our debate here, Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate, where we are witnessing and listening to 3 esteemed candidates, each vying for the chairperson position of the African Union Commission. Earlier on, we heard their thoughts on issues such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, and now we're moving into the second round. And if you're just joining us, we're beaming live from the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa to be specific.
Et pour ouvrir le deuxième round, mesdames et messieurs, honorables assistances, nous allons également ouvrir une deuxième enveloppe pour découvrir la question qui a été préparée par le panel indépendant pour ce débat. Je rappelle également, mesdames et messieurs, que les questions sont rédigées dans les 2 langues, la langue française, ensuite la langue anglaise. Alors, Excellence, chers candidats, votre question est la suivante.
Is this
in
spite of the hopes of the African Union to silence the arms between now and 2030, the conflicts continue to take place. How would you go about proposing African solutions so that you can ensure that there is a prevention, management and a resolution that are effective and sustainable of conflicts? And how would you accelerate the advance of Africa towards a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council? That's your question.
The AU's aspiration to silence guns by 2020, conflicts persist. How will you foster African solutions to ensure effective and durable conflict prevention, management and resolution? And how do you plan to accelerate Africa's push for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council? Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed candidates, the first to answer this round of questions will be His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga. You have 4 minutes, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Well, silencing the guns on the continent. As you know that in 2013, the AU met and passed a resolution to silence the guns by 2020. We are today in 2024, and the guns are not silent. They're very loud, roaring all over the continent. We need to address the causative factors of these conflicts. There are some which are conflict caused by poverty or deprivation. Some of them by conflict within the society, again, things like ethnicity and so on. Some of them are externally influenced or promoted. Some are religious and so on. So there's not a common factor. But what you need to do is to address the causative factors which could translate into these conflicts throughout the continent. And this is what I will do myself. First, as you know that our African countries are not at the same levels of development. Those which are more developed, like for example in terms of governance, there are some areas where you have got exclusions of people, and as a result of this, some people move to use other means. We need to find a way of creating an environment of dialogue within our societies so that we can be able to prevent these differences, conflict ending up into violent confrontation between the various groups. We don't need to put a time span, but I'm sure that it is possible to end these conflicts and stop the guns by 2035, in my view. The other one is the issue of Africa's representation on the Security Council. This is something that has been long overdue. As you know, that the UN was formed at a time when most parts of Africa were colonies. And that's why the UN structure as today does not deal with the realities of the world today. And the situation where you have 5 countries sitting in the Security Council with veto powers, and Africa is not represented, a continent with 1.4 billion people, is not tenable and it's not accessible. And that's why I'm not going to talk about Africa's representation, but we're going to insist that Africa must get 2 permanent seats in the UN Security Council. This is only fair, because we are a continent of 55 sovereign nations. We cannot be excluded when Europe has got 3 permanent representations on the Security Council. Permanent representation with the veto powers is a must for Africa. And this I'm going to insist when I'm elected, if the heads of state of Africa sees fit that I should lead this. I will work together with all the leadership of the continent to ensure that the continent gets a fair treatment on the international scene.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from Kenya. Et maintenant, mesdames et messieurs.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the response from His Excellency, the candidate from Djibouti, His Excellency Mahmoud-Ali-Yusuf.
That silencing the guns is a flagship program, one of the 15 that our leaders have endorsed years ago. And then they put a number of mechanisms and structure around this flagship program so that peace becomes a reality on our continent. The first structure is the African peace and security architecture. And then we have the strategy that we all know, silencing the guns. And to support this strategy, the African Union put in place a number of mechanisms. One of them is the Peace and Security Council. The other one is the Committee of Elders, the Committee of Chief of Staff. We have the Peace Fund, and we can rely on every kind of mechanism. So why is peace is not, let's say, a reality on the ground on our continent? There are a number of reasons. One of them is the political will of countries. We have to be outspoken and frank. We make decisions at the Peace and Security Council level. These decisions are not implemented. Our Peace and Security Council is not proactive. It is reacting to crises when they occur and happen. This has to change. And I'm sending a message to our member countries saying this has to change. The number two problem that we have to face is our standby forces. We have them on the papers. Of course, sometimes we can mobilize them, but they lack resources. We are still relying on foreign partnership for our resources. Let me give you an example. AMISOM. Since 2007, ATMIS has been financed by the European Union and the United Nations, up to 2.7 billion euros. Now, financial resources are critical. Why should we have the money so that we can operate on crisis ground on the continent? Because without money, we cannot deploy our standby forces. Without money, even the committee of mediators cannot go and discuss with the stakeholders. They sometimes wait for the tickets, the per diems, days and days and days. It's very critical that the Peace Fund, in which we have $400 million, that the Commission and the PRC, get to the compromise situation where that money could be used for peace on the continent. So far, only the interest of the 400 million are used. And I'm really shameful when I say, DRC have been given 1 million for peace, issues through this fund. And they have given to, another country 1.5 million. It has to change. We need the authority from the member countries so that we can use this money, the $400 million, to keep peace on our continent. There are so many other bottlenecks that needs to be handled very quickly. But money is one of them. The Peace and Security Council mission is the second problem. And then we have a third one. This one also has to be underlined very, very seriously. When a crisis happens, I give you the example of Somalia. I've been around for some time. I've been dealing with this problem for many years. When there is no unity of purpose between the countries around this country, neighboring countries, this country will never stand on its feet. That's what we are experiencing today in the Sudan. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, millions displaced. Neighboring countries are still fighting on the Sudan, and the African Union and IGAD are watching.
Sorry, sir, your time is up.
Okay, sorry, because I can talk hours about this issue.
No problem, sir. Thank you so much for your contribution. And ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, especially to our esteemed candidates, if you go beyond the time, I will be forced to interrupt, and I don't want to do that, so please forgive me. May we kindly have our last candidate, His Excellency Randemandrato, to respond to the question. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Silencing the guns and issues relating to peace and security in general actually are due to so many things. It's not like turning on a switch or switching it off, not on and off a switch. No, there are several factors that have to be taken into consideration, and that is the reason why the African continent and the African Union have been challenges to silence the guns. But we have to resolve our conflicts peacefully, and this is one of the principles of the African Union, just like the principle of non-interference. So this is an aspect that we all have to actually look at. When exactly do we talk about non-interference, non-indifference, and how do we use them to silence the guns? But that is the situation in which we find ourselves in. And if I am chosen by the heads of states and government appointment as chairperson of the Commission, I will make sure that the African Union Commission would actually work towards resolving our conflicts peacefully, because we have that in the Constitutive Act of Africa, of the African Union. So we have the Peace and Security Council, we have the Peace Architecture of the African Union, but we also have the United Nations Security Council. And then bilaterally, we've got efforts that are underway, and we've heard about progress in some areas, in some regions where we have long-standing conflicts. And then we also have the opportunity of ensuring that there is solidarity with the United Nations, the African Union and the United Nations. This is a framework that could actually enable us to sit down with the international community and talk about crisis in Africa. Why should we only talk about the crisis in Ukraine? Why not talk about the crisis in Sudan and crisis in other African countries? So we are talking about financing peace missions, but there is also a program that actually wants to see the program of the United Nations, that is the SDGs, aligned with Agenda 2063. And then we also have the 10-year plan of our public institutions in charge of working at a national level, but we are talking about the justice systems in our respective countries. Now, concerning the two permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council, I think here in Africa we all know the importance and the urgency of having these two seats, and we have to seize this opportunity because we are actually at the end of 2024, and so we have to act very fast in 2025, and this should be the mantra of the African Union in 2025, and so of course we have to make sure that we can actually speak with one voice on the choice of who will represent Africa on the United Nations Security Council. It's not going to be easy. It will be up to the heads of states to decide who will be the continent's representative. And I will conclude to say that, like this morning, I read in the newspapers the issue, the problem between Ethiopia and Somalia, and this was being resolved by Turkey. The mediator is Turkey. Let us be responsible. Let us be serious. The African Union should be that person doing the mediation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, candidate from Madagascar. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our second round, and without any transition, we are going to step into the third round, and we are going to discover.
À vous l'honneur.